that you, Katie?
Yep.
All of those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Looks like it's unanimous.
So Chair,
I'm sorry.
could I, so I just wanted to let you know that because I'll be moving essentially,
Right.
I'm not gonna be able to record the minutes tonight, just because I don't know what will happen to them in the course of the rest of the month. So if I don't know if anybody else wants to take on the role of clerk.
I was going to ask Gina, how do we do that?
You know what we'll do, Maya, I will take the minutes tonight because I'm recording it, so it'll
Right.
be a little easier. And then what we can do is on a future agenda item, add a
Right.
new clerk, and then that person can take on the work moving forward.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much, Jess, and good luck on your move.
Thanks.
All right. So next on our agenda item, we have the review and feedback of the curriculum recommendations presentation prior to submission to the school committee. Dan, are you going to be leading that charge?
I think in Donis.
Oh, and
let's
Donis?
see. Yep.
Excellent.
Yeah, we just wanted to kind of give some perspective and some insight into and an update from the curriculum subcommittee, which has been meeting pretty regularly. And as you know, we did not present at the last school committee meeting, and our date has been pushed back a bit, and we wanted to kind of give some context to that and some updates around why that is. The first being that it requires, because of the nature of the fact that we are addressing curriculum, which is why we all are at school in the first place, there needs to be a lot of coordination with multiple parties, so that there is an understanding that the recommendations that the curriculum subcommittee gives are sustainable, that they are useful, that they have buy-in and understanding and comprehension across all parties involved in both the school and the classroom. And so we want to make sure that we take the time to have those conversations, to make sure that there's opportunities for discussion and questions. And so that process and navigating that process has taken some time, some weeks, some days. And so that's a little bit of the reason why we have been not presenting to the school committee yet. And just on a side note, you know, we really want to honor sustainability and usefulness, applicability over expedience, right? So we definitely could churn out something pretty quickly, but is it going to be implementable? Is it going to be useful? Is it going to meet the learning goals of our school district? There's no guarantee for that. So we're really doing a lot of the back work on this end to make sure that that communication is there and that it's a useful process for everybody involved, not just us, but the teachers who have to implement this in the school committee and along with our administrators as well. So just to kind of reiterate that we really honor the process of creating something sustainable and useful over something that was quickly made. That being said, we also are members of this community. We are parents. Some of us have expertise in curriculum. Some of us do not in the processes and the regulations, in taking into consideration the state and national standards and how all of that kind of interacts with each other to make its own culture of curricula. And so the curriculum subcommittee, were made up of people who are educators in the classroom, outside the classroom, parents, community members, we are learning how to navigate that space as well. So we are learning how curriculum is implemented, and that takes a certain amount of time. And we want to make sure that we honor that process as we move through it as people with varying perspectives and expertise. So we just wanted to kind of lend some language to that. And we are not going to go through our recommendations right now because we don't feel like they are completely ready. But we are in that process right now, and we wanted to give some context and some reasons as to why we have this process that we're going through now. So Jess, Joe, Heidi, did I leave anything out?
And Donis, I think you pretty much covered it. You know, it's been you know, hard work. It's been productive work. We're at a starting point, and we need just to meet with the curriculum team in the district probably. But yeah, we have a good starting point.
Yeah, and we want our recommendations to be data driven, and they are so far, but you know, we're also realizing that there's probably more data that we can include, and making sure that we're hitting all the right stakeholders who would be involved in the process of the development and the implementation. But our recommendations are going to just start as recommendations, and then the implementation of those recommendations will be a different phase of the project. So I think Adonis said it really well, and in terms of how we're focusing on getting this right over getting it done quickly.
And if I could just add one last thing, you know, we understand that changing some of these very large interconnected systems is slow work. And by we, I mean like everyone who's on this call, and all of our members of the public who are here as well. And so part of that understanding is kind of communicating a different timeline than maybe we're accustomed to. And so just to kind of share that, you know, for us as Native people, we understand that these investments are multi-generational, and that because the work is hard to do, because it's not easily implementable tomorrow, doesn't mean that we don't do the work, right? So I just want to lend some, I know that we all agree with that here. And so but I wanted to say that in this space, that this starting space is, this mountain seems very insurmountable, and seems like a very difficult task at hand, and it is, and that is the nature of being born into a system that we're committed to change and make better for everybody. So you know, we're just living with the reality of the insurmountable is ahead of us, and making peace with that emotionally and spiritually. We are at that space, and we live in that space. And so we're happy to continue to do this work.
I want to say thank you. I'm sure that the work, everything that you are all on the curriculum committee are coming across. I mean, if we don't take that first step, then there are no steps beyond that. And it's all about quality. And like you said, you have to make sure that it's sustainable and that it will be implemented. So thank you guys, because I'm sure that it's quite a bit that has to go into that.
I have to say, not on my chair, Madam Chair, do you mind?
Of course not.
And I have to say, the curriculum team, like all the other teams, everyone's working so hard. And I just want to say, it is probably the most multifaceted subcommittee, because it has such legs in so many directions that the minute you think we all know, we're like, well, what do you mean? Well, what do you mean? Okay, how does the interpretation and then the planning behind that? So I do think, having sort of seen preliminary recommendations from the subcommittee as a first sort of glance, I think, there's all this well-intentioned and it's good work. It's just we need more dialogue to make sure everyone's clear so that we can ensure what Adonis said perfectly was that it's sustainable, that we can implement it, that it's sustainable, and that we're clear about the ask so that we know what the charge is.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Adonis. Next agenda item is the review and discussion of the graduation dress policy for possible revision, recommendations to the school committee. And who will be starting us off with this agenda item?
I can provide context if it helps.
That's good. Yep.
So I believe it was the practices subcommittee that sort of talked through the graduation as like a tier 1 level of recommendation to the school committee. The school committee was like, that's a great idea. You should be thinking that's a good policy. It can be actionable this year. Take a look at it. We actually have policy around that. If you've looked at it, it was written in 1999, so it's not current, but it's not very much. There's not a lot in it, right? It just basically says, here's the dress code for graduation. Here's what to wear. Here's what not to wear. It doesn't, have a lot of meat in there. So I think the good news about that is it may be easily revisable. But I think what we want to basically listen to is sort of the policy and practices team. I mean, what they were thinking about the revision of what that would look like. Because best case scenario, we could talk through, and then the graduation is June 11th. So I know it seems like we have a lot of time, but that means you'd have to get the revision to us so we can put it on the May, I want to say 25th, but let me double check myself. The May
25th
school committee agenda would be our last go at it, so we could inform parents and families and students. Another quick turnaround.
I'm happy to kick us off there. I know Thon, unfortunately for medical reason, was not able to be here tonight, but I think this passion point and the thoughts behind this really came from Thon. But Katie, feel free to jump in, and Carla, feel free to jump in. How we wrote it in our presentation to the school committee was in our tier 1 recommendations, and we talked about formalizing some different student facing practices, and one of them was talking about, as Jen was just mentioning, allowing students to represent their cultures during graduation. So some of our suggestions here were, allowing for like we see with a lot of other clubs or collegiate awards or, military service, seeing different stoles and representative natures there. And then as well as kind of adorning caps with meaningful things such as, feathers or other pieces to represent and celebrate our various cultures. So I don't know, Katie or Carla, if you had anything to add there.
Nope. Sounds like you covered it. Just being culturally inclusive.
And I think taking care to draw a fine line between that inclusivity, and thinking through meaningful pieces of regalia that could be incorporated and allowed. And I think having those embedded in policy would be helpful, but not to think through, just anyone can embellish in ways that they would like, but in ways I think that are culturally significant and meaningful is important, and the thrust of the spirit of that.
Sure.
And Donis, I see that you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I am not on the practices subcommittee, but I am on the policies subcommittee. And something that's really important that I want to highlight that Katie said in terms of language and terminology, I think using the term regalia very specifically is an indicator of the kind of the depth of religious and cultural meaning that worn material culture has for our Narragansett students. And so I think using the term regalia in this policy is very important because that is an indicator of the significance, the cultural and religious significance of these items for Narragansett students.
Did anybody else have any anything to add or any more discussion regarding this?
I know, to Adonis's point of being intentional with our language, I know future agenda item tonight we'll be talking about the definitions, but regalia was defined in there. So obviously I know as we move that forward and have that to lean on, I think making sure that we're all understanding and using that same language will be really helpful in a policy. So I think my question to you, Superintendent Picard, what from our perspective, are those recommendations enough to move forward? Is there something like written that the policy working group can take from these suggestions we heard tonight, or practices work group, sorry, to provide to you? But in what format would help us move this forward in the most efficient and effective and impactful way?
So I'm a big believer in context, and because I have not attended a Charahoe graduation, I would be remiss if I said, hey, this is what used to really happen, because I am for the first time and I'm doing it in COVID, so that's fun. Everyone, I need your support. Hope that rain and doesn't happen so we can make sure we have the graduation. But with that being said, my recommendation would be sort of to reach out to the high school team to see, because while there's nothing in policy, my wonder is, were there anything in practices? Do they have like I had talked to Mr. McKenzie and Ms. Spas about that to say, because there's a lot of, when I talk to people, there's a lot of perception about what can or cannot happen at graduation, but I can't find anything in writing other than what I shared, and that's on our website for the graduation. So my thinking is just reaching out to the high school admin team and sort of talking through, like, is there a letter? And that's what I asked Mr. McKenzie to ask Heather Card to pull any letters that could be helpful, and I can send them your way, Dan, and sort of say, pull it together for us. But then maybe I also think dialogue is important, right? Like just sort of talk it through, because they have the most history. And I'm guessing even teachers that have been there and have been part of the ceremony for a long time, they may be able to sort of lead you in that direction to do a little bit of digging about the conversations. And even, and I would suggest even students, like having, talking about when their next student council meeting is, or their school improvement team meeting, and sort of getting sort of some, either a survey out to the kids or their parents in some conversation, so that we really sort of think through it in a very 360 way.
That's helpful, because I know throughout our conversations with the practices work group, the reason why we talked about this in the context of practices and not policy is, to your point, that we couldn't find it kind of written anywhere to say it could or couldn't happen. But through those of us on the committee who graduated from Charahoe and those with children in the district, depending on who you ask, you may get a slightly different answer, or even just depending on the worldview that we're coming from. If a policy or practice says formal dress or appropriate dress, that may look different depending on the worldview you're coming from. So I think providing some intentional context for those that students may be asking, it would be helpful. So, but yeah, great. Yeah, any of that info would be super helpful, and the practices work group would certainly pull it all together and move it forward. Thank you.
And in the next 20 days, by the way.
No pressure.
Nah.
Oh, hold on.
There's a hand.
I think.
We're holding on.
I thought, did Linda, did you raise your hand? Oh.
Okay.
I saw her waving. I wasn't sure. Okay, so.
Okay.
And because I do know this is actually, it's policy and practices, to Dan's point. So what I'll do to not to have our open meetings rolling quorum violation is what I'll make a Google Drive and share a link and just blind copy everybody.
Oh, there you go. Excellent. Dan, I believe this next item is where we're going to talk about our definition. So the next line item is the next steps and possible recommendations to the school committee for the approval of our terms and definitions relating to work involving the task force.
I'm happy to share my screen, Maya, if that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
So following our last meeting, you would think a year into Zoom, there we go. So at our last meeting, we talked a lot about the and during both of the practices and the policy report out to the school committee, we talked about the need for shared language in making sure that we have that easily accessible to our community. So Maya and I, as chair and co-chair, spent a lot of time taking all of the information that task force members and the public provided us verbally at our last few meetings or emailed over to Maya as our chair. So we put our heads together and made sure, we're trying to cite, through reputable sources and have a wide range of terminology. I'm realizing the copy I have up here is not in alphabetical order, so I apologize for that. I'm not sure if this was sent out with the agenda either, but so I'm Gina, do you think it would be best for us to read through this entirety? I know it's kind of a long document, or to go through kind of with
Well,
general.
I would say I would start with necessarily, reading through it would be long, but I get that. And we could, but my thinking is maybe it may be in our best interest to focus on the definitions. For example, the task force is called Anti-Racism Task Force. So defining anti-racism and being in agreement of what that word means with the school committee isn't easy. So I'll say, yes, this is what the task force is called. Here's that definition. So my thinking is, like I mentioned before, context, I think, is very important. So and to like in Jonathan's point about regalia, if we're going to create the policy, that we present the definition in the document where we're saying, here's the vocabulary word, like here's the word, and this is when we say this word, this is what we mean, so that the public, the school committee sees it in the context that you want them to see it in.
Great.
As
Yeah. So
opposed to
I'll
the dictionary of word, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It becomes, it could be overwhelming.
For sure, yeah. And I know as this was kind of coming together, we did pull from tools as was I forget who made the mention. It might have been Katie, but we pulled from different other organizational glossary of terms in this space that did it really well. So we did take from some of that. So I'll go through some of the kind of highlights and terms that we're using a lot in this work right now. And if you see something that, feel free to stop me. I see a few faces to my right here, but Maya, feel free to stop me if somebody's hands goes up or if there's a word we want to focus on.
Okay.
For anti-racist, we found, this we're using a definition from the National Museum of African American History and Culture, defining it as a conscious decision to make frequent, constant, equitable choices daily. These choices require ongoing self-awareness and self-reflection as we move through life. In the absence of making anti-racist choices, we unconsciously or consciously uphold aspects of white supremacy, white dominant culture, and unequal institutions in society. Being racist or anti-racist is not about who you are, it's about what you do. Let's see, we talk a lot about in our charge from the school committee was to look at policies, practices, and curricula through the lens of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So we wanted to highlight these. This is from the University of Washington Racial Equity Glossary. Looking at equity as a measure of fair treatment, opportunities, and outcomes across race, gender, class, and other dynamics. Diversity is a range of human differences, including but not limited to race, ethnicity, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, social class, physical ability or attributes, religion or ethical value systems, national origin, and political beliefs. And inclusion refers to the intentional, ongoing effort to ensure that diverse individuals fully participate in all aspects of organizational work, including decision-making processes, and it also refers to other ways that diverse participants are valued as respective members of an organization and or community. We wanted to define, we found in order to adequately define racism, that we needed to look at that through the lens of individual racism as well as structural racism. So both of these definitions are from the National Museum of African American History and Culture in their Talking About Race resource. We also looked at I think this should be another sub-bullet, but also institutional racism. Let's see, we did talk in this one, we had a couple different thoughts here. So I did, want to open to suggestions, but around having the acronym ARTF that sometimes is used talking about the Cheraho Anti-Racism Task Force. I think there is power in calling the work that we're doing by the name. I don't think it's necessarily an acronym that holds meaning. So open to suggestions there, if because I think by putting it here, it's basically giving permission and emphasis to use the acronym rather than continuing to write it out. So open to any thoughts and suggestions there. Trying to think what else too. Obviously, as you can see, quite a bit of terms here, and looking at some of the, as we're really getting into the work and looking at from social determinants of health and racial, generational, historical trauma, social justice, privilege, intersectionality, as we're looking at these, different terms. We looked at, bullying, especially as we're talking about policy, making sure that we're looking at not only, what does the state recommend, what is, other evidence-based ways to talk about these different topics, but we also highlighted this from the Department of Education, which is how it's actually written in Cheraho school policy. We talked, we made sure to highlight resources around topics we're talking about around Indigenous people, terms and different terms related to that. We've talked a lot about in some of our meetings and some of our recommendations around tribal sovereignty and what what constitutes a federally recognized tribe. So looking at what that means, as we're looking into a diversity statement and within the policy working group, and moving forward a recommendation around land acknowledgement from the school district, making sure that we understand what that is. As we were just talking about, the regalia, providing a definition there. Regalia in Indigenous cultures refers to the traditional and often sacred clothing, accessories, and artifacts worn or carried during various ceremonies. So we see that. We've talked or had questions or public facing pushback in questions around colonization or decolonization. So we worked on highlighting some resources. This is a combination from two different resources, but looking at decolonization in relation or in the context of education. So the process of analyzing how dominant and colonial ideologies of the superiority and privilege of Western thought and approaches have shaped a classroom. A decolonized approach to education involves dismantling structures that perpetuate the status quo and address unbalanced power dynamics while creating environments in which the authentic stories, voices, and histories of BIPOC, which is defined above, populations can be included in classroom instruction. So I know that was a quick overview, but as you see, we have about 3.5 pages here, which I think is a good start of a wide range of terms. So yeah, very interested to see if there's any questions.
Mr. Grant, I see your hand.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to check where this might be found by the public going forward, and kind of your thought of you mentioned of some of the pushback and the concern over some of the language that we're using made me think of it, but I feel like it'd be good to have this accessible so that if people are concerned, they can go and look at it, or even just with chatting with people, I can say, well, this is what the task force is talking about when they say that. I feel like it'd be helpful to have it really accessible, but I don't know how that works in terms of whether the task force has to vote and decide how to, I don't know how that works. I'm just thinking in terms of communication and getting information out in the community and trying to, just keep communication safe and open and have people not be concerned. I think it'd be helpful to have the terms.
I think that was the whole idea.
Right?
That was Dan's like master plan.
Right.
Which is why I believe
I don't know if
we
it's
have
my
to,
plan, but yeah.
we have to, I think that's why, or I wanted to get clarification on that.
Yeah.
To find out, I think we have to pass it through the school board first.
So I believe
Okay.
so. From here, just like everything else, correct me if I'm wrong, Gina, but I believe our goals here is from the anti-racism task force to provide this as a recommendation to the Chariho School Committee, in hopes that they would adopt this as a set or a glossary of terms. And then from there, pending, their approval, that this would then live on the Chariho School District website as a publicly accessible tool. And I'm not sure, tech-wise, if this will be, pasted right on a website, if it will be a document, where it'll live. But my hopes or expectations, I think we should be intentional about this when we move this forward and make a recommendation to the school committee, is our recommendation would be, for them to adopt this list of terms, but also to make it as accessible as possible, for a tool for our community on the website.
So I would think, so I would say the task force would then, you'd want to take a vote on the agreement on the definitions to present. And like I said, my only caution would be like thinking through maybe a prioritized list of what, so if the committee says, okay, like give us your top 5 or give us your top 10, or like which ones are we talking about right now? Where have you spoken about this one? So it's clear, so that they, like, for example, like I told you, anti-racist is one they've heard a lot. So equity, diversity, inclusion, I would start with the ones first. And it doesn't mean that they won't accept all of them, right? It just means that if they want to be more time to think through, like you say, hey, this is the whole list, and then see how that goes, but be ready to sort of think through, the high priority words to be able to share and approve publicly, so that, like, to Mr. Grant's point, that we could share that when we say these words, especially ones that the task force is using frequently or that are already embedded in recommendations.
I have a question about that. I do understand that it is an extensive list. However, these terms, like if we came up with them previously, I mean, those ones will be easy to include, but who's to say that some of these terms won't come up, or, as we have this conversation tonight? So would we then just be submitting them to the school committee in small doses? I mean, or would it be best that they have the entire list so that we can use this terminology and it will be understood as what we're saying?
I think that's exactly how you would present it, Maya. You would say, here's the list of the words we believe are coming up frequently, that were brought up. And then, but like I said, I would always have a plan B to say, okay, this is a lot for us to think about in maybe one meeting and having the public. So they might want to have a few reviews at it. So be ready with the whole list, but then be thinking about, okay, like which ones did we really tackle in our recommendations first? And then where does it, so what is that, just like you did the tiered recommendations, where's the level of priority around the definitions that you put out? And you can simply say, we believe that these have all come up, and then sort of see how that goes. But you never know. But I do think it may, for some people, it may be a lot. And for others, they may be more under, they've done this work a little bit differently. And I think everyone's context will matter.
So if I'm understanding that correct, would it be helpful to maybe have a present this entire list to the school committee, but toward the top have a frequently used terms or something like that, a highlighted section, still provide all of them as, in really important if we're all going to be diving into this and really doing this work intentionally and meaningfully, that we should all be using these terms and understanding these. I think it's a really useful tool to, even if we're not using them, I think some of the content in here is really important to understand why this work is so important and needed and timely. So would that work? So to have like a frequently used terms and then still submit a full list from there?
I think it will. And to your credit, Dan, when you presented it, you provided that context, like you mentioned, in the work when the motion was made, the school committee used equity, and that's a great way to sort of lead into why that's there. And I think the more you can show how you've used it, the easier it will be for the committee to understand the context of why that word is coming up.
Mr. Grant?
Thank you. I'm sorry, I don't want to make the meeting so long. Two quick things. I'm thinking about how complicated this is, and this will be the last time I'll raise my hand, but point one is that with Adonis's statements on the long work of curriculum, I'm wondering, I'm sure there's behind the scenes work on how to extend the authorization for the task force or how, whatever needs to happen in the school committee to let the work continue. I'm assuming that that's happening. And so I put my faith in that, but whatever is happening, if you need support, let me know. The other thing is I'm really confused and I'm probably just missing something, but I don't understand why the school committee voting saying that the task force can use these words, or that's where my confusion comes in. Cause I feel like the language my understanding is the task force is putting forward the language to explain what we're trying to work on. And I'm missing why I understand the school committee, if we're going to publish something that's being spoken by the committee, that it needs to be approved, that language needs to be approved by the committee, but I'm confused about that vote process because I feel like, I'm wondering if, I don't know, does that make sense? I'm struggling with that because I feel like the language is important and sorry, I'm very sleep deprived and hopefully that makes sense.
No, it does. And I think it's because the task force is advisory to the school committee. So they can't take action. So they provide the recommendations to the school committee, who then takes the action. So what they're saying is, here are the definitions of the words. These are the definitions that the task force is going to vote on and say, yes, as a task force, this is the definition we believe this word means. And when we use it, this is what it means. And the school committee then says, yes, we're going to take action and vote that we agree, or clarify what this term means in this word, so that they have an agreement to say that, and the school committee's action is actually what creates sort of they're the ones who can only take the official action. It is very much, you're correct. It's very much the legal body of the district that is has the power to be able to do that.
And I think to clarify, we are able to use whatever words we're able, in a public meeting, we can are using that language. I think the request from members of the school committee and members of the public was to have this more as a learning tool, if I'm not mistaken. And I think this isn't, I think, something that most task force or, groups from the commission by the school committee to do work aren't usually asked to create a dictionary. So, I've, definitely, it has felt like an interesting, just from my perspective, as, I recognize my worldview in the space I take up as, as a white man, but I do think that we likely aren't asking other groups of people to create their own dictionaries. So that's just a personal thought or acknowledgement. I do think this is a great opportunity for us to share this information with our community. But oftentimes this would not have been asked, I don't think of many other groups. So I do think in our recommendation to the school committee for us to, not, I don't want to say overcomplicated, but not to show that we're not writing these words, we're highlighting other reputable sources and hoping to provide this as an educational tool for their benefit and our community's benefit. I don't really know where I'm going with that, but just that, I think it's an
No, I'm
interesting.
right there with you on that. I think you
I do have to
just
disagree though,
nailed that.
Dan, because as an educational body, we always provide the definition. So we do it to the school committee as well. If you go to any one of our curriculum documents, there's always a glossary that's linked back to the definition. So it's clear for our educators. So, and then I'll go back to sort of the conversation we had around the curriculum team. If we want it to be sustainable and we want our educators, our students to use the words and the language in the same way, we want to make sure it's clearly defined. Academic vocabulary is a big part of our world. And without it, and I think we all see this in social media, people are just throwing out terms and beliefs. So in our realm, in the work of education, it is important for us, and you will see it if you go through school committee documents, and even in our policies and practices, we always have definitions whenever we revise. So it is a common practice in any group that is in Charahoe. Just so it's not like we just asked the task force. This is something the school committee has done, and with all groups, including like the health and wellness subcommittee. They've got definitions, mental health, physical health, what they mean. So I don't want you to think that it's something separate being asked, but it's something that even our own teachers are required to do upon their review of curriculum, et cetera.
No, I appreciate that. I think I was thinking more of some of that may live in a specific policy and not as like a separate entity, not as approving a separate list, but that's helpful context for sure.
So then what you said we would have to do is the task force right now would have to vote on whether we're ready to submit those definitions to the school committee. Am I understanding that?
Yeah, to move the definitions forward to the school committee.
Okay, so then we would need somebody to make a motion to.
Quick clarifying question. Would that be moving it forward as is, or is that, or because there hasn't really been discussion from this task force members regarding if we're going to move forward with the shorter list and then the longer list, or the list as we just presented it. So that would just be my only.
Well, there's no motion on the table. The chair had asked if there's a motion, so you can continue the discussion.
So then, Dan, I think another question would be, could we send it out to everyone like Ms. Picard had mentioned, the Google, if it was going out to everybody individually so that they could take a look at it before we vote on whether to submit it to the school committee, so that everybody's on the same page, because all they have right now is the screen share and a few of the definitions that were read over. So is there a way that we can get it out to everyone that is in the standing of how the committee is supposed to be run? And that way everybody has a chance to have eyes on the document before we create a motion to move them forward. Is it okay to send it out to everyone individually, or how would that work?
You can, but it will prolong. So you would have to have a meeting prior to the meeting that it goes to the school committee if you didn't take the vote. So if So documents can be, so this is where it gets tricky, right? Everyone's doing, documents can be shared. You can all share documents. You just can't share them like a whole, like, so for example, or actually any member of the committee could simply send it out and people just can't reply, right? So the way that I do that to ensure that nobody replies all is I blind copy and I put my name in the 2 line. So if I'm the only one that would get the reply. So sharing the document is never an issue as long as people aren't replying or responding or talking through things prior to meetings. That would be the issue. But you probably would then want to have a meeting earlier, even if it's just to sort of take the vote on before the May 25th meeting, like a quick, in the school committee, we always say special meeting, but you're a task force, you can meet whenever. You can just say, okay, let's meet on, May 18th and let's vote on the definitions then. As an
Okay. Okay. I would like to ask what everybody's thoughts are as far as do you all want to have eyes on them first? I'm curious to know how, if anybody has some thoughts on how we want to proceed with that.
Maya, I would prefer to take some time to read the document first and proceed with the process that Superintendent Picard outlined.
Miss Fee? Oh, we have to unmute you. Hold on.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
I also think that having time to look over the document would be really helpful.
Yeah, that makes the most sense to me. I mean, I've seen it with Dan, so I
So the
have
best thing
seen
to do would be asking somebody to put that in the form of a motion.
Okay.
I will make a motion for us to send this current list of definitions to the members of the Terre Haute Anti-Racism Task Force for their review prior to going to a vote.
Is there a
Second.
second on that?
Second.
Carla?
That was Carla. Okay. All right. All of those in favor of Dan's motion that I will not repeat? Any opposed? Carla, I just can't see your hand.
And I can't see Katie's.
And Katie.
Yeah, we have tech issues, so if
no
sometimes
problem.
when the camera's on, you can't hear me, so lovely.
Any opposed?
Oh, that's 7 ayes.
Okay, well, then that's unanimous. There we have it.
So in order for us to try, so pending, we'll get that sent out. Are we able to, do we have to send it in a non-editable format? Gina, I want to make sure we're not breaking, so we can just send it out as
Yep, you can. The biggest thing is not to, like, the way you would get in trouble. Let's say you send it as a Google Doc and you were all commenting on the Google Doc. That's another
do that.
rolling
Okay.
quorum.
So just send it as a Word doc. Folks can send it back to Maya, and we'll go from there. Great. Okay.
Yeah, and then when we get to next meeting dates, we could pick 2.
Great. Thank you.
That was painless. Excellent. All right, so on to our next agenda item, which is the public comment on future agenda items.
Well, on any agenda item or anything on
any
the agenda, like public comment. Actually, this should have been revised. I thought we fixed that. It should say just public.
Unless I have the old agenda, because didn't it get revised? And I probably printed out the first one.
But it should be public comment only. I thought we fixed it.
Public comment. Oh, right. That means the floor is open.
Etta had just raised her hand.
Unmute here. Yeah. I just want to say, I think you guys are doing great work. I'm very impressed. Especially Ms. Picard, with your just willingness to listen to the community and your emphasis on that, I think is huge. I do have one suggestion, and that is I wish that there was a place on the website that was dedicated to this work, with some resources that people might read. Just from hearing stuff in the community, people who aren't doing this kind of work aren't getting it. And I think that part of a school system's responsibility is to assist parents and everybody with knowing what's going on. And I just encourage as much transparency as possible. And I think those definitions are going to be a good start. But I think there are other things that you might do, because I know you're using a lot of resources in doing this that just would help people understand what's going on. So that's all. Keep it up.
Silver Moon, I see your hand is raised also.
Okay. So yeah, I concur with Etta Zasloff, because I always have a really hard time figuring out where like agendas and everything for these meetings are. I couldn't find it tonight. I found where to register, but I just can never figure it out every time. And having a place that I know I can go, and I couldn't even find like a link for anti-racism task force or anything. So it's confusing. But my other question was about your discussion about cap and gowns. I know there's some tribal kids that are graduating this year. And so I think, I know the experience I had when my eldest son graduated a couple of years ago, and where there isn't a real policy in place, people don't know what they are and are not allowed to do. And so I think those questions are coming up. So where you guys were discussing it, I'm wondering what happens with your discussion. Will it go to the school board? Will it at some point be something that community members can weigh in on before it becomes a policy? And like, how does that work so we can kind of know and voice our opinions when they're wanted?
Well, I know part of that answer is, Silver Moon, that we have to have the recommendations from the practices committee to the school committee by the 25th, so that there is more clarification as to what can and cannot be worn in graduation ceremony.
And it has to be written on our school committee agenda in a way that the public understands what's going to be talked about and addressed, so they have enough time to attend. And the state law says it's the 48 hours prior to the meeting. And I'm sorry you have that link is in 3 places for the I made sure of it. It's on the main page, the task force page, and just so everybody knows, the district calendar, every meeting is listed there. So if you go into the calendar, all agendas are there. But any help in helping us clarify, because I feel bad because we did make sure that it was in 3 places. And the 4th was the Secretary of State. So
I know I've heard from a lot of community members that same point of it's hard to find, because I think even I know myself, I'm Googling Charahoe Anti-Racism Task Force, and a page does come up, but it looks outdated. It looks like we haven't met in months. And if you know where to look, you can find it. But that page that's coming up shows like our next meetings in March. So whatever that page, and I can send that to you, Gina.
I know, but that should be, that should, when you had sent that email out, Dan, we fixed that immediately.
Oh, okay. But yeah, I know that was just, I got a lot of questions.
And that's the other issue. When you have it in lots of places, then you have to remember that it's in lots of places.
Add it to everywhere. Yeah.
Which is why the district calendar is probably, that's where it's supposed to be, but we linked it on the main page, and we also linked it on the task force page that was created. And we did that to maybe help additionally. So, but we'll get there. It's a work in progress.
Mr. Etta, I see your hand up.
Here we go. Maybe just a little statement on the front page that said for events, see the calendar.
Well,
I don't,
for the
because
yeah, I could, but the link is on the page.
it's on that front page that says
It
says
says,
for events.
It says upcoming events, and then it's listed the anti-racism task force, all the next 3 events that are
No,
coming.
but I'm saying in order to get the information to come to these events, if you somewhere said, you know, see the calendar, like you even have to look at a tab and click down in the tab to find the calendar.
Right.
Calendar of events, and click right to the calendar. It's just really, unless you know how that website works, and you know it works like a technical person thinks, it doesn't work like a user thinks. That's my comment. I'll shut up. Maybe too much information.
I want to also, Silver Moon, I'm not sure if, oh, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Okay. No, so I just wanted to say, I found the meeting because it was right on the front page. But when you click on the meeting, it just gives you the thing to register. And when you go to the Secretary of State, I didn't, you know, it's just not obvious for people like me that are foolish, that I click on anti-racism task force. Like you have to click like on several different things over and over again. And then you had to click on the date before it finally brings up something that said agenda. And I almost missed it. Because even though it was there, it was like under a list of things. So I think it's just not, it's not obvious. And some of us are dumb and need obvious things because we don't click on all these links. And I just kept going in and then getting back out and looking for it somewhere else, thinking it's got to be easier to find somewhere. And I'm just making this hard. But no, it is kind of hard. So I think it's just a lot of steps. Like I would think, here's the meeting, and then here's the agenda right next. So I just click on that next to make it easy for those of us who struggle.
And did you understand, Silver Moon, about the graduation? So the reason the practices committee is going to get the information to the school committee by the 25th that they have their meeting on, so that the parents and families can be reached in time for the June 11th graduation. I just wanted to make sure we answered that question.
So it will be like part of the school committee meeting before graduation.
Yes.
It's just really right up to the wire.
Yes.
Okay. I only, because that's, I guess it's just of a concern to me because there's nothing in the policy right now. I know families that do like, that want to bead caps. That work gets started early. It is not fast to bead things. So people are looking at policies like I did when my son graduated that doesn't say anything about what you can and can't, that you can't decorate anything or, and I was going off past practices years ago. I had family members that graduated in full regalia. So I had worked and beaded my son's cap and he was all set to go. And then it was the day before their practice that I got an email saying they can't decorate their cap or gowns or anything. And that's what happened to me a couple of years ago. So for other families, like they're doing this work early based on the fact that the policies don't say anything. And if they're going to find out right before whether or not they can or can't, they've already done it. So I'm just wanting you to keep that in mind.
Well, the good news is nobody has their graduation cap and gown until June. I think they get them June 8th, June 9th. So that's a good thing. That means they can't decorate anything just
late
yet.
this year. Okay.
Yes, because of all the delivery stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing then.
So that's a good thing. But we'll give them, if it goes to the school committee for the May 25th meeting, which would mean that we would have to have it approved and ready by no later than May 19th. For the school committee to be able to put on their agenda for the May 25th, and that would give parents 2 weeks.
Okay.
And the good news is they don't have their caps and
But
gowns.
they don't have it, so they
But I
couldn't.
did hear that, Silverman, I did hear a parent talk to me about the mortar boards, which is the top of the cap.
Yeah,
And I asked the high school to look through any letters that they may have sent out, because they believe it's the practice too, but nobody can find it yet. So we're sort of
Yeah.
looking through. Yes.
Jess, your hand is raised.
So I guess just out of curiosity, because it sounds like the lack of clear policy on this leaves room for subjective judgment calls on whether or not students can do that. In lieu of the whole process to go through with public comment and all those things, is there a way to have a stopgap type policy that is implemented, or a interim policy to make the judgment that would be in favor of the cultural expressions as they're desired? Like a way to do it where the subjectivity is more favorable to those who are trying to.
So yes, typically that would happen through the school governing process or on the school improvement teams. They would call their students, they sit together, and they have the ability to make practices and protocols at the school level. So because if the principals and the school improvement teams can do that a little bit easier, because that is a policy approved by the school committee. But that is a quick way where, for example, it's similar to how they do a spring events, right? We have the RIDO playbook. That's not a policy, but it's a guidance document that provides schools with planning for spring events, and then they create protocols. So similarly, it could be at the school improvement team, they could request the agenda, we put on the agenda to have the conversation around the letter that goes out to families, someone's point about what expectations, and that would be another way to get input into that process. Because we do protocols all the time, and that's why you have a practices subcommittee. There's just a lot of things that happen that way. Not everything is via policy. It's usually our larger, sort of more sustainable things that have happened that often some come out of like either a concern or some way to make sure that we anchor to like the best intention possible.
So to that end, does this task force, would it be useful in any way if we made a recommendation to utilize that pathway for families that are looking to have that?
Yeah, any parent, a school improvement team member, or I can reach out to the high school admin team at any time.
But I mean, like, for us to recommend to those decision makers to decide in favor of of supporting the traditional cultural expressions.
Because your action goes through school committee, I don't believe that the task force can take action on behalf for the high school. But I think as individuals, you could reach out to the high school. But I'd have to double check that, like, the sort of the that's a little sticky. I don't know.
That's been some of the, to your point, Jess, that's been some of the conversations of the practices work group, is that, in that example, there isn't a policy that says students can't do that. It's, individual who maybe without knowing or intentionally or unintentionally are saying you can't, but there's nowhere written. So it's in theory, if we just didn't tell people they couldn't, they could do it. Nothing in our policy says they can't. But, it's not fair to all students if, let's say, they ask somebody and they said, yeah, I couldn't find it in the policy, go ahead. And not all students knew that. And then, so I think there's pros and cons of formalizing it. But I think as far as the, quickness or legality or anything, whether it's a policy or not, there's nowhere saying they can't do it. It's just been the practice of the school district to tell students that they can't do it. So I don't know how helpful that was, but yeah, that's been the challenges we've had on that work group for sure.
It was my experience with one of my previous children who graduated, because it's not written, We simply had, my brother came and put the feather on his cap, and it was somebody there in the back while the graduation was at URI that told them they couldn't have it on there. So that's why it needs to be written that it is allowed, because while, like you said, one teacher may say, yeah, that's fine, or because, previous family members were able to do it, we think that it's okay, but while they're lined up, they're being told something totally different. So until it is written in stone or written in the policy that it is allowed, then it's going to be left up to somebody else's interpretation and possibly modified as they're walking. So I think what Miss Jess, I think you're onto something with if the individuals reach out to the SITs of the individuals of the high school, the student, then they can get a faster answer and begin beating right now, if that is.
Yeah, it would
what-
be no different than all of you are used to seeing a letter from a principal saying, we're having National Honor Society, National Junior Honor Society. Here's how this event's going to run. They provide you with the logistical protocols. And in that memo, they provide you with the expectations. And it is expected that you come with your mask. It is expected that you stay 6 feet. It is like, we do Rhino stuff. But I think it's very typical for all of us to see those protocols embedded in a memorandum to parents based on the upcoming events, about expectations, number of guests, et cetera, et cetera.
I just want to say really quick because everyone keeps mentioning the family member that graduated in full regalia. That was my husband. I'm just going to say he did not have, the school flat out told him he couldn't do it, but he showed up on graduation in full regalia, and his mother, being the force of nature that she was, when they tried to stop him and told him he had to change, she said, as soon as you show me the policy that my traditional clothing are not allowed, then we'll change. And because they couldn't produce it, they let him go. But they had flat out told him no and told him that he wouldn't walk across the stage, but Holly Harris wasn't having that. So that's how he got away with it. But even then it wasn't, the practice was no.
Yeah, putting it in policy, I think helps clarify the expectation so that we don't have to, that this way everyone has the advocate.
Right.
Okay, actually, our next, was there any more? Oh, Jess, are you still raised? No, okay. Did I miss anyone? Miss Fee, are you? That wasn't you. Oh, okay. All right. Well, then, our next agenda item is going to be to pick 2 future dates. So our next scheduled date for our regular meeting would be, what is that, June 2nd? For our regular anti-racism task force meeting, which would be Wednesday, June 2nd. And however, we need to pick another date before the 19th to submit, so that we can meet back and vote on the terms. So
Even
we
by the
can-
19th, Maya, you could do, as long as it's approved by the 19th, you should be.
Okay, all right. So how about Tuesday, the 18th? Tuesday, May 18th, to have another meeting to vote on the terms. Would that give everybody enough time to look over? That looks good. So we're gonna say Tuesday, May 18th at 7 o'clock. That's good, okay. And that will be for, to vote on the terms that we send to the school committee.
My only other recommendation would be, since Jess is leaving, that you add one other item, which would be the clerk, which is the next actual topic, the appointing a clerk.
Oh, right, that's right.
So just those two items I would put.
Oh, we could do that. We could do the appointing of a clerk and the terms, both on the meeting on Tuesday, the 18th. Does that have to be a vote, or that's just we're all selecting that date? I'm not clear,
Where's Joe when you need him?
right?
It doesn't hurt. Take the.
All right, let's
I will
vote.
make a motion
There we
to
go. There's a motion.
have a additional meeting on Tuesday, May 18th at 7 p.m. to appoint a new clerk and approve our definitions.
I'll second.
Beautiful.
Excellent. All of those in favor? And that looks like everyone. Excellent.
So then it would
Sandy?
just, yeah, the next future agenda items for your June 2nd meeting.
Right, for the regularly scheduled June 2nd meeting, some possible future agenda items.
Actually, Maya, I'm gonna amend my suggestion to you, because now I'm thinking of if you're doing the graduation, right?
Yep.
you probably want the task force to weigh in on the recommendation to the school committee for the graduation on that May 18th meeting. So you have it for the May 25th meeting.
So the graduation items as well as, so all three of those items. So then, Dan, we're gonna need you
I will
to,
amend my motion
there you go.
for us to meet for an additional meeting on Tuesday, May 18th at 7 p.m. to vote in a new clerk, approve the recommended definitions to the school committee, as well as a recommended policy around graduation procedures.
I'll second again.
All of those in favor?
And then
Okay, that's unanimous.
just officially withdraw your original motion, Dan, and
I withdraw my original motion.
just I think if you were to withdraw your second.
Withdrawing my original second.
Thank you. Donna would be proud, or she's going to yell at me for doing this wrong.
Now, for our June 2nd meeting, is there anything that anybody would like to add for that meeting? For an agenda item?
I would like more guidance or a discussion around our proposed recommendations and, final timeline, since it will be our meeting right after the school committee meeting. And just maybe a final timeline for this group as it stands and some more guidance and discussion there. I don't know how to capture that succinctly because I am not a succinct person.
I think it would also be nice to have I think that maybe to your point too, Katie, about kind of a touch point with each of the working groups with a update about where they are. I'm thinking like with the policy working group, we have a, almost finished recommended diversity statement, for example. I think that would be great to get public input and comments on that, as well as, other final recommendations before they're submitted.
Does anybody else have any ideas for any future agenda items for the June 2nd meeting? That means they'll come up between now and then in an email before the agenda goes out, which is fine, Oh, Mr. Grant.
I promised I wouldn't raise my hand again, but just to clarify, is there any guidance or recommendation from the school committee at this point for what the continuation or reinvestment, either a continuation of the task force or reinvestment in this work will look like? Because I think Katie spoke to that, and I didn't want to piggyback on it, but I just want to make sure that I'm curious where that stands.
So I don't want to speak on behalf of the committee, but my understanding, Mr. Grant, is that they, as a whole, want to hear all the recommendations from the subcommittees. And really what has happened so far for the two groups is just hey, is this the right track? This is what we're thinking, just because we have not, to make sure that we're on the right trajectory.
Right.
So my understanding is that the committee will hear all of the final recommendations and then make that decision.
Okay. And and if I remember correctly,
There's not like an end date of any time.
Right. That's the piece that there was kind of there was egging me, is that I wanted to make sure that there wasn't a end of the authorization, which I didn't think there was, but I wanted to clarify.
Nope,
Awesome.
not that anyone has approved or has put forward to me.
Okay, thank you.
I do think they would make that public. They may have been, I think, at a meeting, a request, and there was not a second.
And if I might add, one of our recommendations currently is that there be a continuation of this work, perhaps reconfigured more broadly, but it will at least be one of our recommendations for this work to continue, perhaps in a subcommittee or something as is deemed fit by the school committee. But this work will certainly not finish within any number of months.
And I think what's going to be helpful, to Katie's point, is one, the Department of Education is putting out a racial equity toolbox coming in June. So that's going to lend itself, because they recognize that we are, we are one of many communities getting involved in this work. And I will tell you, I am not an expert in this work. I myself am a learner, and actually Jane and I are both taking on professional development with the South County superintendents to dig deeper into the work. Katie helped us write a grant to make sure we got that funded so we could embark on that work, both as individuals as well as our summer advance with our leadership. So we are trying hard to also think through our own work on our own lens, so we deepen ourselves as well as we think, because it's hard to do that and then also think about the district at the same time. So we think it's important, and doing with our colleagues in South County allows us to sort of cross those district lines to have these conversations and provide us a safe space to sort of talk through what we're thinking, what we wonder about. But I think this is, like, I think we've said it before, this is a long road, but I think we're very much invested in it. And I think the school committee putting this task force together showed the community that they were invested in it as well. And that's the final one.
I think that's the final one there. That's the final one. So can we have anybody who wants to make a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Miss Katie, and can we get a second on that?
I will second that.
Okay.
All of those in favor of adjourning at 8:19. Wow, surprise, unanimous.
Nice work, everyone.
Thank you very much.